Sunday, June 19th, is both Father's Day and Juneteenth, now an official holiday in the U.S. And across the U.S., Black families who honor Juneteenth will host cookouts, music festivals, prayer services, and even rodeo events. Some families will indulge in red food and drinks, which represent the bloodshed during enslavement. Now, in contrast, some big brands will be hard at work attempting to monetize Juneteenth with products from salads to party packs of plates and cups. What are we getting wrong about Juneteenth and the celebration of this national holiday? And later in the show, we're going to talk about fathers and why did it take 50 years for Father's Day to become an official holiday? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
From the Indianapolis Children's Museum's watermelon salad to Walmart's swirled red velvet and cheesecake flavored ice cream to Dollar Tree's Pan-African themed plates and napkins, corporations are capitalizing on Juneteenth by selling merchandise. And in most cases, these companies are failing to provide any historical context with these items. Today, I'm asking, are these companies promoting negative racial stereotypes that, quite frankly, African Americans find offensive? And what should these companies be doing to get the celebration of Juneteenth right? Here from my leadoff panel are Professor Stephanie Leonard. She's a professor of management at Howard University who specializes in workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also joining me is Dr. Amara Inya. She's a public policy expert for the Movement for Black Lives. And Dr. Trevor Lindsay is here. She's a professor of African American women's history at Ohio State University. Good morning, ladies, and thank you all for joining me. Sunday, we are going to be celebrating the national holiday, Juneteenth. Everyone around this country, if they didn't know about Juneteenth, they probably, at least by now, have heard something about it. So I want to start with you, Dr. Lindsay. Give us the brief history of Juneteenth and why it is so significant that this Sunday we celebrate this holiday.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So brief history is Emancipation Proclamation is signed in 1863, which effectively legally ends the institution of chattel slavery in the United States. However, as we know, the Civil War continues on for about 2.5 more years after that happens. And what occurs is that in Texas, and specifically in the city of Galveston, Texas, where eventually the proclamation is read that slavery is abolished, happens 2.5 years after, on June 19th, 1865. So it effectively ends slavery in that specific community. And I think it's important for folks to know as they're celebrating Juneteenth that there are a series of endings throughout the nation that are happening, that the Emancipation Proclamation did not, in fact, liberate enslaved people in every case. And so you have instances like this. And I think Juneteenth becomes one of the most significant because it's one of the latest and the major ones. And the Galveston community immediately begins commemorating this day as a way to think about their long struggle to emancipation, their fight for emancipation, and what it means to build lives in this post-slavery moment, which turns into a Jim Crow era of racial terror.
So Dr. Inya, we know Donald Trump claimed, I almost can't even say it, but he claimed that he made Juneteenth, he put it on the map, that he gave Americans an awareness of Juneteenth. We know that that is categorically false, but help us understand why it is in this moment, 2022, we see Juneteenth as a national holiday. This wasn't a national holiday just a couple of years ago. So how do we go from this holiday being acknowledged primarily for folks in Texas to now the entire nation acknowledging Juneteenth?
Sure. So, I mean, definitely, no president, and certainly not former President Trump, gave us the holiday or created the awareness. On the west side of Chicago, we've had a Juneteenth parade for years, and elsewhere around the country, they've been involved in celebrating and commemorating this moment. I think we have to look at the uprisings of 2020 and what happened with just a different level of awareness, a different level of just the intensity of not just on the holiday, but this was a time where the issues that Black people have been calling out, the cries for justice, the work was just reached another level at the national level and at the international level. And I think having Juneteenth now as a federal holiday is a direct response to that, meaning I don't know that we would be here where it is getting this federal recognition without the uprisings in 2020. And it's important to note that, especially when we're thinking about what kinds of interventions respond to the demands that Black people have. And I think Juneteenth is a result of what happened a couple of years ago.
Okay, so we come full circle in some ways. So thank you, Dr. Inya, for reminding us that this was not about Donald Trump, obviously, or no one president, and that there are African American communities throughout this country that have been acknowledging Juneteenth for years. It definitely now has gotten more attention since it is a national holiday. But we see this weird thing happening, Professor Leonard, with these big brands. So whether it's ice cream or a salad or these party packs, tell us what companies have done in their efforts to recognize this holiday.
Right. So some have missed the mark, and some have acknowledged Juneteenth appropriately. But companies like Walmart, of course, released a Juneteenth ice cream with some Pan-African colors on the packaging, which also misses the point of Juneteenth. As Dr. Lindsay explained, the historical implications of Juneteenth. And so an ice cream absolutely does not commemorate nor celebrate the meaning of Juneteenth. As far as a watermelon salad, that also has historical implications that makes it extremely inappropriate to release as a Juneteenth celebration. Going back to the relationship between watermelon and African Americans and the connotation between the two in this country, going all the way back to that racist film, A Birth of a Nation, we all should know the implications of associating African Americans with watermelon in this way. So it's extremely inappropriate, and it's unfortunate that these companies have not only put forth these inappropriate associations with Juneteenth, but also sought to profit off of those associations.
Yeah, and Dr. Treva, Lindsay, let me get that correct, Treva like Areva, how do these companies get this wrong? Like, we have spent 2 years having this national dialogue about systemic racism and structural racism and how we dismantle it. And companies have hired diversity and inclusion experts. They've hired folks like Dr. Leonard to come in and consult with them. But yet we see, it took social media as backlash for some of these companies to pull some of these products back, and some pulled some of the products back, but not all of the products. But help us understand how these companies, with all these bright people, can make billions of dollars and figure out how to solve every problem that we have as consumers, but yet got this so wrong.
Well, you're giving them a lot of credit for being bright people. But I think what I would say with billions of dollars, that it's so fascinating for me because it is the commodification of Blackness and Black product and Black celebration that once again gets profits built in what they consider goodwill and good presentation to a public through these items, whether they're reinforcing anti-Black racial stereotypes or not even tapping into this history. And like Dr. Inya mentioned, in 2020, and of course, this is building off of the work of people like Opal Lee, who have been pushing for a national federally recognized holiday for Juneteenth, that it is literally the death of George Floyd, combined with the uprising, combined with the murder of Breonna Taylor, that catapults us to this moment. But they're also in a climate where corporations are realizing that elected officials are pulling back on teaching the hard histories of how we even got to Juneteenth. And so what it means to think about the legacy of Juneteenth, the afterlives of slavery, the racial terror we still live in that came to a boiling point in 2020 amidst the uprising in regards to police brutality, as well as the disproportionate effect COVID-19 was having on Black communities. And so I think, sadly, these companies are missing the mark because they see this as an opportunity to gain new customers as opposed to an opportunity to really grapple with the hard history, to grapple with what it still means to this day that Black people were enslaved and then survived the racial terror of Jim Crow and are currently surviving the racial terror of targeted mass incarceration, of police brutality, of criminalization, and various other anti-Black systems that have their roots in what Juneteenth is honoring the dismantling and ending of.
And so, Dr. And you're playing devil's advocate for a moment. We were having this discussion with our production team about, are there any of these products that would be acceptable? So we were looking at the party pack. So it's the napkins and the cups and the like kente cloth, tablecloths. So let's say you are a Black family someplace in America and you want to celebrate Juneteenth. You want to have your family over, you want to have a cookout, you're going to do red velvet cake, and maybe you're going to talk to your the younger people in your family about the historical meaning of Juneteenth and use this as an opportunity to educate the next generation. And you want to do it with some themed items. Is there anything wrong with a party pack?
Well, I mean, I think the very premise is wrong and unfortunate, right? So it's not the party pack. It is the fact that in this country and in this economic system, and specifically capitalism, it is very on brand to figure out any way to make money, any way to profit. And the fact of the matter is that these corporations, whether they accept it or not, or like it or not, are trying to profit off of systemic racism, off of Black death, off of oppression. And so they are doing it under the guise of a holiday. I mean, this is the country and we live in a world where, Valentine's Day, Christmas, Easter, everything is about how can we make money. And when it comes to oppression and when it comes to systemic and structural racism, these companies are still figuring out how can we make money. And that premise is incorrect. So I think instead of how this new products, and whether it's an ice cream, a lotion, a soap, or whatever they may come up with, these companies actually have to do that internal work to say, first of all, what are your internal practices as it relates to your Black employees, your hiring, your promotion, the culture of your company? Do that work, rather than putting the energy into what kind of ice cream flavor Black folks might like, because that's not what we're asking for. We're not asking for things to buy. We're asking for, and we're demanding and working towards structural and systemic change. And if someone does want to do an event or to celebrate or commemorate Juneteenth, at the very least, find a Black vendor, a local Black vendor.
And that was going to be my next question. So, Dr. Leonard, let's say it's a Black party store or a Black company. Would it be okay for them to create a line of products, whether it's, again, the ice cream, the cheesecake, or these decorative items you might use at a party? Would the critique be the same?
So I think what you mentioned is key, a Black-owned business. I think the celebration part of Juneteenth is not for everyone. It's for the Black community to celebrate our ancestors, right? And it's really a serious event, right? It's a day of commemoration. It's a day because the underpinnings of Juneteenth is that there were many enslaved people who did not know that they had been emancipated. That is the underpinnings of it. And so I think the celebratory part is very much another Black culture thing, because we are known to turn tragedy into triumph, right? And so that is the reason why it's celebrated. And so if we, like, for instance, I myself purchased a Juneteenth t-shirt from a Black-owned business, right? Because I wanted to celebrate my ancestors and my heritage. So I think it's appropriate to celebrate Juneteenth and for businesses to profit, but it's also important that those businesses are serving the underserved, marginalized communities that were affected by Juneteenth. I think that's the most important part.
So, Dr. Lindsay, I'm sitting here having a flashback to this conversation you and I had about the Barbie doll, right? We had that conversation about Ida B. Wells becoming a Barbie and Mattel and the commercialization of her image, her likeness and her image. Can you envision any way that a big brand like a Walmart, Sam's Club, Costco, any of these big brands could create a product that would be, in line with, would be consistent with acknowledging the pain of what Juneteenth really, represents? Is there anything that they could do that you think would be okay? This is great because this is helping raise awareness. It's helping to educate that next generation, maybe kids who don't have parents at home that are going to teach this. They're not going to get it in school, we know, particularly if you live in certain states. So maybe they're going to walk into their local Target and see something that is helpful and useful. What would that be?
Ooh, now that's a good question. I'm not sure that product exists, particularly at Walmart, without a truly reparative framework of their workers receiving a living wage, the racial discriminatory practices that currently exist at Walmart, and the exploitative at the global level that we see and extractive labor that is happening there. But what I think is important in that moment, and again, I love that Dr. Inya brought up these local Black owned, we were celebrating Juneteenth before it became a national holiday. Somehow we found the things we needed to celebrate, whether that's a Miss Juneteenth pageant, and I recommend everyone check out that amazing film by Channing Peoples about Miss Juneteenth in Texas, or the barbecues, the convivial things that we are doing. We didn't need those products to do that. And so I think there's this interesting moment for these corporations, which I think the non-white commemoration of this holiday is about what are you doing to repair the damage that has happened as a result of slavery? What are you willing to do as a company to build that? Then have a public proclamation, perhaps it is on Juneteenth, of this commitment, and that we start to see the work that we can hold you accountable to this. So the product part of this, because you have to understand, as slavery, we were literally a commodity. So this idea that somehow a commodity that a corporation could produce would be sold back to us in honoring our status as former commodities is really a particular kind of mind trip that does not actually address racial injustice against Black people. And so I don't imagine that product as much as I imagine these corporations committing to doing the work that they need to do that moves beyond just inclusion, but really looking at equity, really looking at a radical transformation of the way they engage Black communities.
Okay. Because I'm a lawyer, I got to keep going with this question. I got to keep pushing back on this. Dr. Inya, what if Walmart says, wait a minute, walk down 10 of our aisles, you're going to see Black hair care products that are manufactured by Black manufacturing companies, Black hair care companies. You're going to see clothing now that's, designed by Black designers. We've dedicated 15, 20% of our shelf space to products that are being manufactured by Black folks. And so we have been doing the work of recognizing the contributions of African Americans and making our stores and the items that we sell more inclusive. Does that give any, is that a legitimate response from one of these big brand companies?
It's not a legitimate response. I mean, it is a response. And of course, they can point to whatever it is that they're doing. But we have to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball, which is we are demanding and we are working towards structural and systemic change. So I'd be interested to see how much they're paying their employees, right? How much are they paying in taxes? Are they paying corporate taxes, right? This is an international issue because the issues that Black folks are facing are the result of the global systems that were formed on the backs of Black folks, exploiting their labor and the legacies that continue today. So it's not just enough for, yes, vendors, Black vendors may get product placement. It is not to say that they should not place their products and to malign any Black vendors that get product placement in a Walmart, a Target, or any big box store. But when we get to the root of the issues that Black folks are facing, it is going to come down to within their companies, how are they paying their employees? How are Black folks being brought in? Are they being promoted? What kind of culture is it? Do they have vendors in terms of procurement, right, of Black companies? And then are they paying their taxes, or are they lobbying that they don't have to pay corporate tax? Meanwhile, Black folks are bearing the brunt of this system of taxation in the United States that actually disadvantages Black people by its very structure, right? Those are the deeper questions that mean more than, some token benefits that some have been able to obtain, which is real. But when we look at the bigger picture, these companies are able to get off the hook and they're doing what is comfortable, right? But the change we're seeking is going to force them to be out of their comfort zone.
Well, Dr. Leonard, would you feel differently about this if Walmart said, we're going to sell products made by Black companies, manufactured by Blacks, where all the profit from these products go to Black-owned businesses. So we're going to give Black businesses an opportunity to make that Juneteenth T-shirt that you bought. So you don't have to go online and buy it. You can go in Target and buy it. But that same Black company that sold you that T-shirt is now selling them in Target. How would you feel if that is the way that these big companies treated Juneteenth?
So I think the product itself is it is the symptom of a bigger problem, right? So without the work being done when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we will not see certain products that.
Wait a minute, Dr. Leonard, isn't that doing the work? If Target or Walmart says, hey, we want more diverse vendors, so we're going to invite Black-owned businesses to come sell and let them decide what they want to make. If Black folks say we want T-shirts and we want tablecloths, we want ice cream, we're going to just give you the shelf space in Target to sell it. So you can reach millions more people than you can reach with your online store.
Right. It's certainly a step in the right direction, but it does not prevent that gesture from still being performative if the rest of 364 days of the year, the company is not doing right by its African American customers, stakeholders, and employees. And that's the bottom line of it. And so that is most certainly a step in the right direction. I would not suggest a Black business not take Walmart up on that offer, right? However, I think that the rest of the work that needs to be done, making sure that there is a committee of well-appointed, community-driven African American employees and stakeholders that are driving that conversation and that event and that celebration is going to be important, because you're going to run into the same issues if you have the same one Jamal, the intern, that is advising, right? That is advising this. We are not a monolith. We all do not think the same. And so these companies think that if they bring one person to the table, that is going to avoid all of these issues. And that is not the case. There needs to be a committee, a whole room full of African American men and women who are very well invested in the community and have the knowledge and skills and abilities to plan and approve an appropriate Juneteenth celebration. So all of those things needs to happen. And if the result of that is we're going to bring in Black-owned businesses to sell their products and put them on the shelves, then that is when it goes better. It will go better for the company, and it doesn't seem performative, and it doesn't seem like we're just trying to monetize on the pain of an underserved community.
Dr. Enya, do you see any companies doing exactly what Professor Leonard just said? Are there any examples that you could point to say, hey, they got it right?
I think what we saw over the last couple of years is a lot of companies hired DEI staff or consultants, but when I talk to a lot of people who are in that space, a lot of them behave as though the work was done when the hire was made, right? So you have a person who comes in, now it's one person, they don't have staff, they don't have the authority to make decisions or to build their own team, right? So it's just the person was hired and then the company checks the box and then they can move along their way. And so I think what was mentioned previously is absolutely the case. The sort of token steps or the things that are within the company's comfort zone are where we'll know whether they are intentional about addressing these issues or if they just want to do something to check the box and keep it moving. By and large, I think a lot of companies have not, even companies that made financial commitments in 2020 haven't lived up to that, right? So there's this notion.
Are there any, I guess I'm just trying to find out, are there any companies that any of you can point to that you would say, hey, they got it right. This is a model. This is what other companies should be doing, should be following.
I think I could say off the top of my head, a company that actually attempts to live out their values would be like a Ben and Jerry's. large corporation. They've taken some controversial stances. They really try to engage on the issues that are important to them and to live that through the values and the operations and the infrastructure of the company. That's one example. I'm sure there are perhaps others, but by and large, it's been disappointing.
Yeah. Dr.
I would agree with that.
Either of you have any examples other than Ben and Jerry's?
I was going to say not really, to be honest. And I say that to say, and Ben and Jerry's is such an interesting example because Ben and Jerry's had already been doing that work before someone was killed, right? So there was this incredible effort to push for these issues, to hear their community, to hear their audience, and recalibrate around different things at different times. They've been reflexive. They've been told they're wrong publicly and made different kinds of moves. And so I think Ben and Jerry's offers an opportunity for companies to look at and see, how do we do this work continuously, not just in a spectacular moment of uprising, not just in a spectacular moment that requires someone's life to be snuffed out on film, right? But there's a commitment that's rooted into these companies. And that's not a Walmart, that's not a Target, that's not an Amazon, that's not these big box stores and big box entities at this point.
Dr. Leonard, any examples? I hope we can come up with at least a second one. I mean, it'd be great if we had a long list. Doesn't look like we're going to have a long list, but I'd like to think there's at least more than one company that we can identify quickly.
Right. Unfortunately, there are many companies that take their corporate social responsibility seriously, but you're asking specifically about the Black community and issues that affect the Black community. And so when it comes to that, I can think of, for instance, Tom's. They take their social responsibility very seriously, right? But their target issue is not things that have to do with the Black community, right? But when it comes to Ben and Jerry's, although they do not just focus on the Black community, many of their social justice, when it comes to social justice, you almost have to tie the African American community into that conversation because we are almost always the victims of issues that have to do with social justice, right? So Ben and Jerry's does offer that almost from the beginning, inception of their organization. And just like Dr. Enya said, when you are thinking about tying it into the operations of the organization, decision-making in the organization, how people get paid in the organization, we're talking about a Ben and Jerry's. And that's not this is not terrible news. I mean, it's terrible news, right? It's terrible news, but it's not super terrible news because diversity and inclusion is I call its adolescent phase. Organizations have not completely figured out how to incorporate these diversity and inclusion initiatives and weave them throughout the entire organization. And it's especially true because there's so much pushback from organizations because it's scary. Because what we're talking about is decentering whiteness, and that is always going to be scary for folks, right? And so we're trying to move the ball along there, and we're just not there yet with all these Fortune 500 companies that have billions of dollars in resources to put towards it. It's the willingness, and are you willing to let people go from your company who no longer fit what you're trying to do now? I mean, there are several things that come into play when it comes to that. But if you're asking the question of, are there any companies out here that fully are invested in the Black community and their Black employees, the answer is going to be Ben and Jerry's.
Okay. Well, I have flashbacks because I've been having this conversation for the last 2 years, and I was talking to a diversity and inclusion expert. You probably know her, renowned Mary Frances Winters, and she was doing a lot of this training over the last 18 months or so, and she said it became a moment where her clients told her to stop calling white people white, that the white employees were offended by being called white, and it was making them uncomfortable. So she went from, come in, we want to dismantle our systems of racism, and we want to, decenter whiteness, to, can you stop calling white people white? And she's like, okay, what do we want to call? What do you want to be called? So yes, I know this work is hard, and thank you for putting it in perspective that it is in its adolescent stage, which means it has a lot of maturing to do before we get to where we want to be. But Dr. Lindsay has been here before, and she knows we've got to end on something positive. So Dr. Lindsay, give us some hope as we go into this weekend celebrating this historic, now national holiday that many, as we have said, Black community have been celebrating, but there are going to be people outside of our community, maybe for the first time, acknowledging this holiday. Tell us what we can tell them to help them understand how they should be celebrating and recognizing Juneteenth.
First and foremost, happy Juneteenth to my Black family out there, like Black folks everywhere. I hope y'all are enjoying this, celebrating this, commemorating this, digging in, doing and participating in the events that we know are so crucial to Juneteenth, especially in places like Texas and throughout the U.S. South. For non-Black people who are commemorating, please do some work on that day. Please do some work. Please do some work and commit to the work that you're going to do the other 364 days of this year to racial justice, to upending anti-Blackness, to learning about Juneteenth, why it was so important for that holiday to exist for that community and for various other communities. And I think it's important that people take this moment to learn about all of the other ways that we understand slavery, especially in a moment when that's being evacuated and demonized in our curricula. To really take that day to do some learning, to do some committing, and to think about the transformative work that we want to do.
Okay, so that means translation, Black folks, is not just about barbecue. So we got to do some work too. So we want our allies
to do some work. Yes, but if Black people want to chill that day, I'm actually okay with that too, because our labor, right, is also part of this conversation, that we have been extracted for labor for years upon centuries in this nation. And so that is okay. Like, Black rest is really okay. It's joyous and needed and necessary for the struggle against racial justice. So enjoy that time with family. We weren't allowed to in so many cases when we were enslaved. Right? Connect with people, build with people, envision, imagine, love on people. That's part of Juneteenth's legacy for Black people as well.
Okay, so that's work too, Dr. Lindsay, for a lot of people. That's a lot of work to love on each other. All right, Doctor, in your final words, what do you want people to do on Juneteenth?
No, I completely agree with Dr. Lindsay. I mean, it's a moment for commemoration, but also a moment for us to recalibrate and to focus on the work ahead, what we're building towards, the kind of society that reflects our values as Black people. So whether you celebrate it or rest, as long as we have that our vision in front of us, I think we're good.
All right, great. Dr. Leonard, any final words? What do you want us to do on Juneteenth?
I want organizations to allow the African American community to lead the celebration or whatever it is it's going to be. That's what I want to happen. I don't want to see another soul food festival with an all-white hosting panel. That's not what I want to see on Juneteenth. So I want those organizations to decenter whiteness and allow the African American experience to be centered as a part of their celebrations on Juneteenth. And happy Juneteenth to all of my Black Americans.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, ladies. A great way to go into this weekend. Lots of thinking to do, reflection. I love this notion is Black joy. Yes, rest. And I want Black folks to think about, what this means in this moment and how we as a community move forward. I'm so disheartened by what's happening in schools and how difficult it is for us to even teach our kids about Juneteenth and so many other, historical moments in our history. So I hope families use this opportunity to talk to their kids too about why we are even at this moment and what this moment means, because we're going to need our parents, we're going to need our elders, our folks in our homes to talk about this, because so many kids won't get this in their classrooms. But again, thank you, ladies, for joining me this morning, and happy Juneteenth to all of you. All right, we are shifting gears. Bye-bye. We are shifting gears. We are not only celebrating on Sunday, Juneteenth, we are also celebrating Father's Day. The two holidays happen to fall on the same day. And a little history about Father's Day. It took this country almost 50 years to make Father's Day an official holiday. Whereas with Mother's Day was first recognized in 1908. And by 1914, 6 years later, it was an official holiday. So what does this say about how this country values fathers? It's kind of odd because we're such a patriarchal country. You would think that the men who control pretty much everything in this country would elevate Father's Day in a way that's different than what we typically see. Dr. Omikango Dabinga, my friend, is here. He's a professor at American University. He's a hip hop expert. He's a rapper extraordinaire. And he happens to be the father of three. And he celebrates dads all day, every day. So I'm excited to have him joining me this morning as we talk about Father's Day. Good morning, Dr. Dabinga. I think you're muted, Dr. Dabinga. All right.
That better?
That's great. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. So, okay, I got to give a full transparency here. We were all set to have you on to talk about Juneteenth with those amazing panelists that we started the show, those three incredible doctors. And we were just going to talk about Juneteenth. And I said, wait a minute, it's Father's Day.
Yes,
We should be talking to Dr. Dabinga about Father's Day and some nameless people, because I don't want them to end the recording. Some nameless people that work for the special report gave me a little pushback on Father's Day, but eventually we all came around. But I think that's kind of how Father's Day is. It's kind of an afterthought in this country. What's up with that? Why is the country that's controlled by men, that's built, on patriarchy, why is Father's Day such an afterthought?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that you distinguish the way that Father's Day is looked at versus our system of patriarchy, because I don't want people to think that in having this conversation, there's some type of gender thing that I'm talking about, that men are being treated in a way that's different from women in terms of that. But Father's Day specifically, this country just has a history of not really acknowledging fathers, and there's several reasons for that. I think number one of the challenges is that because of this mentality that men are out there at work, and the traditional stereotype of the man is at the job and the woman is at home. It's led to this idea that fathers are not generally in the home because they're always out working. And the fact of the matter is that even for fathers who do put in work 9 to 5 or whatever, they're still engaging with their children at home. I think another thing that has been very prominent in this country is that people have built this idea of the absentee father centered around particularly the absenteeism of Black males in the home. And we can get into that a little bit later, because a lot of that is actually built on a lie as well. And so that idea of Black absenteeism in the home, people can go back to studies, the coming motherhood, from the 1970s, and talk about all of these things about how people have painted Black women and women in general as being the head of the home. It has ostracized men on many levels. And now in this commercial world that we live in, social media and the like, fathers have been excluded to such an extent that even when you watch television, a lot of the fathers that you see are idiots, the Homer Simpson types of the world. And a lot of the men who are leaders in the homes are actually uncles. And it's very Bernie Mac, for example, it's very interesting to see that dynamic as well, which has kind of changed since the days of shows like The Cosby Show.
It's very interesting that you say that, Dr. Dabinga, about this image that has been painted of absentee dads. And we've done shows about debunking the myth that Black fathers are absent. They may not be in the home, but studies show that Black fathers are fully engaged in the lives of their kids. There's even one study out that shows that Black men do more as it relates to homework and care for kids, even more than white dads. But yet that image of Black dads of being absent and being irresponsible is perpetuated in mainstream media. And even people like Herschel Walker, a Black father himself, a Heisman Trophy winner, now a candidate for senator in the state of Georgia, he perpetuates this stereotype about Black dads. In 2020, he's giving an interview to Diamond and Silk, I have to say, but okay, it's still an interview.
Yes.
Where he says, he apologizes for Black dads being absent and says he wants Black fathers to go into neighborhoods and become fathers to the fatherless. And then we get this report that Herschel Walker, who's criticizing Black dads for being absent, has 3 kids that he has not fathered in the way that he's criticizing other Black men. Maybe he's paid some child support, but he has not been in the home with those fathers and appears to be estranged from at least one of them, and maybe has some losses with the mothers of the others. But the point being, perpetuating that stereotype. What do you make of that? Herschel is such a odd figure on so many levels, but he is a Black man. He is a Black father. He does have this huge platform. He's running neck and neck in Georgia with Reverend Warnock. So we can't fully dismiss him, although he says stuff that makes him, someone that should be dismissed. But
absolutely,
he's perpetuating this. What do you make of that?
Absolutely. And we have seen this so often when it relates to Black political figures who are looking to endear themselves to the white community, when they talk about the need for more fathers in the home, but people don't really dig into their lives because they're giving them the narrative that they want. And when it comes to Herschel Walker, we've seen that on pretty much every level outside of the fact that he's actually played football and was a football great. He's been a liar. I mean, he's lied about everything from his college education to his work with law enforcement. The list goes on. And so this is just another example of that. But as long as he's giving the Republican conservative base the party line that they want, and he's showing that he can be just as hateful towards Black people as they are, they're going to let him get away with anything, which is why he's actually in some polls leading over Reverend Raphael Warnock, which is amazing and sad. But it speaks to the fact of what Malcolm said. Whenever a Black man says something that white people don't like, they're going to find somebody else to get up there and contradict that opinion. And going to your first point about, Black fathers in the home, it was the CDC that did that report, back in 2013 that talked about the fact that even if the families may not look, traditional in a sense of mother, father living in house together, whether the father may not be living there, there's that engagement on many levels, more so than any other community. But again, that's a narrative that doesn't work in society as it relates to Black males, but it still persists today, even though it's been proven to not be true.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating. So the CDC comes out with this report. It got some attention, but I think many people have not even heard those statistics and still buy into, as you just so eloquently stated, this oftentimes religious right, this conservative Christian ideology that Black men are absent, and that's what's wrong with Black families, and that's why we see high crime rates. They use that as and try to draw a straight line as the problem that's in the Black community is because of the quote unquote absent Black dad who isn't absent.
Right. But can I add something to that? I think it's also important to understand that we historically have had policies that have actively worked to push Black fathers out of the home. In so many situations in our communities, you haven't been able to rent apartment buildings if you have a father in the home, or you haven't been able to get access to welfare if there was a parent. And so I called it the coming motherhood, but it was the coming matriarchy, the report that I talked about a few decades ago. But we've had policy set up in place where it was harder for a mother to get assistance with that father in the home. And so we also have to look at the fact that there's been a concerted effort in this society to push fathers out, primarily Black fathers, from that home. It's not people make it just, this guy just had a one night stand and just didn't care and left. There were economic considerations that this government put in place in many of our communities that made it harder for Black men to be in those homes. But despite that, we're still there and still present.
Yeah, Dr. Diane Stewart wrote a book on Black love and Black families, where she does this really incredible job in a couple of chapters outlining those very policies of the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s. If you lived in public housing and all the efforts that women had to go through to hide evidence of the father because the social workers coming in and the kids are all involved. Everybody's got to hide the shoes and hide the ties and hide any evidence of the father. And this country said, look, Mom, if you want to get help with these kids, you can't have the dad around. And so these policies, as you said, that purposely separated families and made it impossible for Black fathers to live in a home. And then you go as a country and criticize the father for not being in the home, even though the policy prevents him from being in the home. That's a kind of pressure and the kind of hypocrisy, I should say, that this government is engaged in for decades. And many of those policies still exist. But have you seen any changes, Dr. Domingo? You mentioned the Cosby's show, which was popular in the 80s when we all loved Bill, before the prosecution and
all that.
or when Bill was still America's dad. What other progress do you think has been made, if any, in terms of how Black dads are presented in the media?
Well, I have definitely seen an improvement, and I don't watch every show that's out there nowadays. And to be quite honest, television-wise, I'm more of a sci-fi comic book type of guy. But even in that, I'm seeing more Black fathers who are present. And there's some shows that I watch where, quite honestly, the most stable person on the show is the Black father. And these aren't shows that it's like an all black cast. I'm talking about shows like DC's Arrow, which went off the air a couple of years ago. The Flash, which is still on, right now, has very prominent Black father. And so I'm starting to see more roles where the Black father is there, the Black father is present, and the Black father may have different sexual orientations, may not always be the heterosexual Black male, but is present as well. And so I am seeing a little bit of a concerted effort to paint fathers better in these shows. We need more of it because the narrative that is out there is still strong. It's not happening clearly enough to my liking in terms of the numbers, but I have seen a concerted effort to have Black fathers painted in a better light on some of these television shows. Not all of them, but a good number of them.
So it's interesting. I'm watching something on Netflix called All American, and Tate Diggs plays the dad. He's married to a white woman, and they have two kids who are twins, and he's an ex-NFL player. He has a father that raised him, that instilled his love for football and supported him all the way from a high school player to college, D1, to the NFL. He marries a white woman. The father rejects the white woman, and then there's another family in the show where the Black father leaves the family. And there's all this conversation that's taking place on social media about the fact that Tate Diggs is this stable, very successful, ex-NFL player, now high school coach, but he's married to a white woman. So there are these dynamics about, is this show saying Black dads work when there's a white wife involved, but the other Black father who was married to a Black woman exits. He's gone from his kids for like 8 years. So do you think, how does that play into this whole, this image of Black dads? Do you think, media, and I know you said you don't watch a lot of television, but this happens in a lot of, even commercials now, we see a lot of interracial couples. And I've had some media experts on and say, hey, we love that. But at the same time, we haven't had enough, time in this country where we've seen stable Black fathers in homes with Black mothers and Black kids. How do you respond to that critique?
Oh, most definitely. And as it relates to the commercials, yes, we have been seeing more interracial couples in the commercials, but I think we can both say many of those interracial couples have not featured Black fathers. There have been a couple, but generally speaking, if you do get a Black person as a parent, it's usually a Black woman and a white husband, and so we have seen some of that as well. When it comes to these TV shows, absolutely, they're still perpetuating a little bit of that stereotype, and we have to understand that this is part of Hollywood, right? I mean, Hollywood historically, if you have a Black couple that are in a movie, it's considered a Black movie. But so you have, in terms of, and then you don't get the same level of money financially in terms of support. So, but you make it interracial, maybe add a white wife or something like that. Then it becomes a movie for the people. It becomes for everybody. There's a budget increase. And so there's a desire to want to see that on some levels. But when it comes to that traditional Black family as relates to the media, we absolutely have to see more of that because people still want to put that stereotype out there because quite honestly, at the end of the day, it sells. And even though I've talked about a little bit of progress that I'm seeing in some of these television shows, the fact of the matter is that the Black man as thug, the Black man as the hardcore guy, the Black guy as the absentee, it still sells compared to Black fathers in the home, just as the Black woman as the sexual deviant, as the Black woman as the person who's dependent on the government or who's always angry. That still sells, or sassy, the Jezebel type, that still sells on television as well. And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to acknowledge progress when it's happening, but when it's not happening, we got to call it out. And quite honestly, that's why I'm working on a documentary myself on Black fathers, just because I think it's really important that they get portrayed in the way that I see them, because I don't know any Black fathers who are not in the home.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I really like this show, All American, but as you're talking, I'm thinking about the show really does kind of play into every racial stereotype there is. I'm like, okay, Areva, all of the criminals in the show are Black men.
There you go.
They've killed, they're the gangsters. They've killed people. They've been to jail. They've got seedy passes. They're engaged in all kinds of seedy crap. All the white characters in the show are rich Beverly Hills, folks. There is a one black guy. I
Yeah.
guess there's a black guy who is a music producer, very successful. He leaves his daughter for months at a time, a high school
Wow.
kid, in this big mansion, and she ends up having like a mental breakdown. So, okay, yes, even stuff that we're so conditioned,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
I'm sitting here like kind of mad at myself, like, why are you watching this show with all these stereotypes?
Yeah,
So
it
it's
gets
not hard. We
normalized.
gotta even ask ourselves, like, how, like, what role do we play in perpetuating these stereotypes? They're so
That's right.
common that even when you're like into a character, or like I like Taye Diggs as an actor, subconsciously, I am being fed these
That's
stereotypes.
right.
It's tough, Dr. Domingo, which is why I'm so glad I got to, move towards wrapping this up. So I got to shift from all of that horrible negative stuff that happens to something positive, which is that you, as you said, working on this documentary. So one, congratulations to that. But also you pay tribute to Dad. You actually created a song called Every Day is Father's Day. Why did you do that?
Well, I wanted to honor my dad, and I wanted to add all the fathers out there who I just saw were not getting the recognition. And I wanted to honor fathers of all backgrounds, because I feel like the story, we just get neglected. I was watching a thing on gun violence on MSNBC yesterday, and it was a white woman who was on there, and she said, black and brown moms have been doing this work on gun violence way before I got involved. And I'm like, well, dang, how hard is it to say that black and brown moms and dads have been involved in anti-gun violence, anti-gang violence? Like, we are here, and society just refuses to see us on many levels, but we are just as integral to our households as moms, and it's no disrespect on the moms. We need to work together collectively to acknowledge the hard work that both moms and dads are doing to raise kids who can be productive citizens in this society, and that's why I did the video.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And oftentimes we know that, efforts to drive a wedge between black men and women, that's real. From a policy standpoint, media does it. And oftentimes they act as if there's a binary choice, right? Either black women or black men versus, as you just said, of course, black fathers have, they feel the pain when, we watch these black kids get killed by police, and we watch them get killed in their own communities. They have a father,
Yes.
there is a father. And even though the mom might be out front giving the press conference or appearing to be leading the charge for justice or whatever, there's a dad somewhere. That kid didn't just fall out the sky. And we
That's
have
right.
to definitely recognize that more. So I really am grateful to you for the work that you are doing. What else can we do, Dr. Domingo, in this moment to help? There is a lot of stuff that dads do, men do, that it's not cool. There's still a lot of gender bias,
Sure.
and we still live in a patriarchal system in this country. But I'm all for elevating. I have a husband who is a phenomenal dad of my 3 kids, and I didn't meet my dad until I was 18, so I had a very rocky relationship, which is not uncommon for a lot of people, black and white in this country. But there are great dads like yourself, my husband, millions of great dads out there that we want to elevate and support. How do we turn this narrative around?
Well, we have to take advantage of the platforms that we have. And, you're using this incredible platform to share this knowledge. And people may not have as large a platform as you, or people who are out there in the public space like you as well. As we come up on this weekend and beyond, use your social media to share some good stories of people who, maybe it wasn't your father, another father you saw in the community, people who are doing hard work right now. Maybe it's a teacher who's been like a father figure for so many in your community. There are so many people out there, biological fathers and father figures, who deserve to be honored and who deserve to have some recognition. And I just believe in painting a balanced picture of everything. Every father isn't perfect. Like you said, many are absentee. But if we spend more time celebrating the ones who are there, then we're going to start to see that the media, the television stations, they're going to start to see, oh, there's more of a demand for this. So let's start putting it out there. Let's start getting these scripts that have the black fathers out there because they exist. Let's start putting these writers in the room that want to talk about black fathers because they exist. But we have to understand that if the people lead, the leaders will follow. So let's all get out there and use our platforms to celebrate fathers, any father that we know, in any way, shape, or form. That's how we're going to continue to change this narrative.
All right, absolutely. What about, we're talking about changing the narrative. Tell us about the relationship that you have with your kids, because oftentimes I think a lot of dads people, representation is so important, right? People
Mm-hmm.
mirror what they see. And
That's
sometimes
exactly.
dads, and I've heard younger fathers say this, say they didn't have a father. So
Mm-hmm.
they didn't know how to be a father. I have a young nephew like this. He has a 2-year-old. And he looks to my husband a great deal to help him because he said, even though his father was in the home, he wasn't very involved. So he's
Mm-hmm.
learning how to be a dad. What are some of the things you would say to a young father that's struggling, that wants to be involved, but doesn't, maybe they didn't have a role model in their
Mm-hmm.
own home? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say that, quite honestly, I understand what people say when they didn't have somebody in the home, but there's a lot of things we learned to figure out that we didn't have access to, right? People learn how to do things as it relates to money. They may not know much about finances. They read books and this and that. My point in going back to my prior point is that there's always somebody that you can celebrate or look to in the community. So yes, you may not have had that father in your home, but maybe there's a teacher in your school. If you're going to church or mosque, maybe there's somebody there. Or again, you can study and read and see what other people are putting out about Black fathers. You can read books about these things. Not having one in the home is not an excuse to not know how to father, because really at the end of the day, for the child that you're having, do everything that you didn't have or that you didn't get. And if you didn't have or get those things, there are outlets for you to be able to get that type of help. But you have to actively seek that help because nobody's just going to provide it for you. So we understand that not having that there in the household can be a challenge, but there's so much access to information that you can get nowadays. But acknowledging that nobody was there, that's actually the first step, because you're acknowledging that you want to be better for your seed now. And so it's beautiful that you acknowledge that you may need to get some help, some outside help, some therapy to acknowledge the hurt and the pain that's there. But you're doing all of this so that you can be more present for your own children. So that's the first step on a ride towards you being a great father. And I congratulate you for being any father out there feeling that way, because you're on that journey.
Yeah, and I just want to say, even though I didn't meet my dad until I was 18, we ended up having a very close relationship, and he played a really important role in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're a dad out there and you haven't been involved in year 1, year 5, year 10, doesn't mean you can't be involved in your child's life beyond that. So, people are human. We don't get books. We don't get guidebooks when we become parents.
Yeah.
So even if you've made some mistakes in the lives of your children, you can still turn it around.
Can I say something on that really quickly? So
Absolutely.
I did my doctorate on Jay-Z, as we talked about before. I teach a class on Jay-Z. Jay-Z's father walked out on him when he was about 11 years old. They didn't reunite until he was about 30 something years old. And 2 months after Jay-Z reunited with his dad died. And his dad asked him to forgive him for being absent. And Jay-Z said, if I didn't forgive him, if he didn't come back into my life, I would not have been able to heal myself in a way to be able to marry Beyonce, because it opened me up to be able to love, even though I didn't know how to. That's the importance of what you said about, even though you may have been distant, you can always work your way back in if you choose to.
Yeah, that I didn't know that about Jay-Z, and thank you for sharing. It's such a powerful story, and there's so many stories out there like that, right? Where someone's dad wasn't around, and then there's that choice. And then I got to go back to my show I'm watching. There is a redemption story there, because the dad that left for 8 years comes back. He's dying of cancer, but his son has to deal with the pain of him being gone for 8 years. But there is this moment before he dies where they do reconcile, and the dad apologizes, and the son admits to the dad that I was angry.
Yes.
I was angry because you left me, but I want you to be in my life. And so there is that redemption that can occur when you are open as the child and when the parent. But the parents got to do the work too. So
That's right.
I've counseled with some dads who think that the kid should be reaching out to them and want the kid to do more. And it's like, no, dude, you're the adult in this situation. You've got to humble yourself, apologize. And if the kid doesn't accept it on the first apology, it may take apology 990.
That's right.
But you as the adult have to hang in there and keep doing that work. So, so important that we encourage dads, as you say, maybe in your church or mosque, your community. If you know a single dad out there or a dad that's struggling, give them some love on this Father's Day. Let them know that they don't have to be perfect.
That's right.
Just be present. Don't have to be perfect, but be present. Thank you so much, Dr. Domingo. Always good to see you. Great work as usual. Can't wait for your documentary to come out, to have you come back to share that with us, because I know it's going to be bomb.
Thank you.
Everything that you touch. So again, happy Father's Day to you. And your kids, all three of them, are lucky to have you as their dad.
Thank you.
Always good to see you, my friend. I want to thank all my guests this morning. From Juneteenth to Father's Day, make sure you are out there celebrating, whether you're eating barbecue, you're at a music festival, or as Dr. Lindsay said, you're just having a day of rest and reflection. There is so much that we have to reflect on as a country around Juneteenth, and I think we got to figure out how to do better by those dads that are present, those dads that are doing the work, that are getting kids through the toughest times. And we know right now with suicide rates up and our kids going through so much depression around COVID, they need their fathers, they need their mothers, and they definitely need their fathers as well. So if you know a dad that's out there that's doing something, just doing the work of a good father, make sure you give them some love, show them some appreciation on this Father's Day. We're going to end with some words to live by. And these are quotes from dads of our staff. Super excited to share that with you as we show some pictures of our dads as well. So our executive producer, Candy, her father always told her that water seeks its own level. Great quote by Candy's dad. Justin, one of our booker and producer, his father figure always told him to follow your passion and what you love, the money will come. Great advice from Justin's uncle. And my dad that I met at 18, who I then went on to have a really great relationship with, who recently died, used to always tell me, life is short, so make every day count. All right, y'all, be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together, and make sure you're celebrating the dads in your life and do something to celebrate Juneteenth.